Frank Perconte was raised in Joliet, Illinois, where he attended St. Mary's Catholic Grammar School before graduating from Joliet Township High School. Coming of age during the Great Depression, attending college was never a realistic option. Like many young men of the era, he needed to find work as soon as possible. In 1935, through a connection with a man named Richie Gleason, Perconte and his close friend Herman Hansen secured jobs at a steel mill in Gary, Indiana. Employment was scarce, and the 45-minute drive each day, long before Interstate 80 existed, was a small price to pay for two 18-year-olds eager to earn a living. By the spring of 1942, Perconte was working as a crane operator when he and Hansen visited Joliet's famous Rialto Theater. Before the feature film began, a newsreel introduced audiences to a newly formed military branch, the Airborne Forces. The preview explained that paratroopers earned an additional $50 each month. With the likelihood of being drafted already hanging over them, that extra pay immediately caught their attention. Rather than wait to be assigned wherever the Army chose, the two friends volunteered together, ensuring they would enter the airborne service. Both men became members of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, joining Easy Company under the command of Captain Herbert Sobel, another soldier from the Chicago area. They reported to Camp Toccoa in northeast Georgia in July 1942. Their time serving together was brief. Their instructors noticed the two friends spent too much time joking around, so Hansen was transferred to another platoon within the regiment. Perconte remained in Easy Company and endured Sobel's notoriously demanding training. For 4 months, the men repeatedly ran up and down Currahee Mountain, a grueling exercise that inspired the unit's famous battle cry, Currahee. To those who later visited Currahee Mountain, the training seemed almost unimaginable. The steep slopes and slippery terrain made the climb difficult, even without carrying military equipment. Yet Perconte always dismissed the challenge with characteristic modesty, explaining that they were simply young men in excellent physical condition. Nearby fields once held the training camp where Easy Company prepared for combat. Although by 1945 the camp had disappeared entirely, only a small museum in the nearby town of Toccoa preserved reminders of the regiment's early days through uniforms, weapons, medals, photographs, and other artifacts that documented the history of the 506th. Unlike many veterans who later became famous, Perconte never considered himself an exceptional storyteller. His recollections were usually brief and matter-of-fact. Without Stephen Ambrose's book and the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, he likely would have remained an ordinary retired mailman whose extraordinary wartime experiences were known only to family and friends. Instead, the series introduced him to millions of viewers and quietly transformed him into a respected public figure. Even late in life, Perconte found the recognition surprising. At 95 years old, he could walk into his favorite local restaurant and hear people point him out by name. It was a remarkable contrast to the morning of June 6, 1944, when his life had nearly ended before it had truly begun. During the D-Day invasion, German machine gun fire narrowly missed him after he parachuted into France. His aircraft departed shortly after 11:20 p.m., and he sat near the rear of what paratroopers called a stick. When the jump signal came, he exited into complete darkness, landing safely in an open field near Saint-Mère-du-Mont. Around him were several fellow Easy Company soldiers, including Carwood Lipton, George Lewes, William Boyle, and Pat Christensen. The night jump presented challenges unlike anything they had experienced before, since all of their qualifying parachute jumps during training had taken place in daylight. After nearly 2 years of preparation stretching from Camp Toccoa to Fort Benning and finally England, they were as prepared as anyone could be. Nevertheless, Perconte never claimed he was fearless. Looking back, he laughed at the suggestion, insisting he had certainly been afraid before making that historic jump. His closest brush with death came months later during the Battle of the Bulge near the Belgian village of Foy. While attempting to observe German positions, he climbed over a dirt embankment that served as a fence. Enemy soldiers spotted him first and opened fire. The bullet entered one buttock and exited through the front of his right thigh. His comrades immediately shouted that Perconte had been shot in the backside, a memory he recalled with amusement rather than embarrassment. Although the wound was painful, he later joked that it had been the best thing that ever happened to him because it qualified him as a disabled veteran and earned him a pension. Remarkably, after only a short stay at an aid station, he returned to the front lines alongside the rest of Easy Company. Perconte appreciated the attention Band of Brothers brought to the men of Easy Company, and believed the miniseries captured much of their experience accurately. However, he also believed certain scenes had been exaggerated for dramatic effect. One example involved Captain Ronald Spears, who was portrayed as having executed a group of German prisoners on D-Day. The story became central to Spears' fearsome reputation within the series, but Perconte dismissed the tale entirely, insisting it had never happened. Another memorable sequence from the series involved Perconte himself. In the dramatization, he and several members of Easy Company were sent on a patrol near the end of the war. After hearing suspicious sounds in the forest, they discovered a concentration camp. The series showed Perconte sprinting back to headquarters to alert Lieutenant Richard Winters, who then led American forces to liberate the prisoners. While the scene became one of the most emotional moments in the series, Perconte explained that reality unfolded differently. Easy Company encountered the camp while marching through the forest after noticing an unbearable smell. The soldiers viewed it only from outside the fence before receiving orders to continue marching, as another unit behind them had been assigned responsibility for securing the camp. They never entered, and Perconte remembered the overwhelming odor more vividly than anything else. When discussing Captain Herbert Sobel, Perconte shared the same opinion held by many Easy Company veterans. He never contacted Sobel after the war and admitted there was little affection for the demanding officer. At some point, Sobel was removed from command, and Ronald Spears eventually took over the company. Perconte never claimed to know the details behind Sobel's reassignment, only that the change happened and Easy Company moved forward under new leadership. David Webster also stood out in Perconte's memories. Unlike many of the enlisted men, Webster came from a Harvard education and possessed literary ambitions. During the war, he constantly wrote in his diary, later using those notes to produce a memoir. Despite working as a journalist after the war, Webster struggled to find a publisher. His manuscript remained unpublished until the popularity of Band of Brothers renewed interest in Easy Company decades later. Webster himself never witnessed that success, having disappeared during a shark fishing trip off the California coast in 1961. Perconte remembered him as an intelligent but unusually quiet man who rarely spoke and never seemed to fully blend in to the close-knit group of ordinary soldiers surrounding him. Considering the intensity of Easy Company's campaigns, Perconte's survival with only a single combat wound was extraordinary. After enduring the brutal winter fighting in the Ardennes, the surviving members of the regiment eventually reached Hitler's mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden. There they explored the Eagle's Nest and sampled some of the liquor once reserved for the Nazi leader. Perconte remembered Hitler simply as an evil man who, at the time, was among the most hated figures in the world. The success of Band of Brothers, brought to television by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, earned numerous awards and widespread acclaim. More importantly, it introduced a new generation to the sacrifices made by the men who fought in World War II. The series honored not only Easy Company, but countless veterans whose courage had largely faded from public memory. Like so many members of what became known as the Greatest Generation, Perconte returned home in 1945 without seeking recognition. A few years later, he began working for the United States Post Office, spending the next 33 years delivering mail throughout his hometown of Joliet. Most of the people on his route had no idea that the quiet mail carrier bringing letters to their homes had fought through Normandy, the Netherlands, Bastogne, and Germany. He never volunteered those stories, preferring to live as an ordinary citizen. His attitude reflected that of many veterans from his generation. Across neighborhoods throughout America, former soldiers quietly returned to civilian life, raising families, working blue-collar jobs, and rarely discussing what they had experienced overseas. Neighbors who had survived D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, the Pacific campaigns, or Korea often lived side by side without drawing attention to their wartime service. Their heroism became known only when someone took the time to ask. Perconte was no different. He willingly answered questions about the war, but never felt compelled to bring up his experiences on his own. Those fortunate enough to visit him heard first-hand accounts that only someone who had lived through those battles could provide. Looking back, it seemed unlikely that the young men marching toward Foy or fighting through the frozen forests of the Ardennes ever imagined their courage would someday be immortalized in books and television. They believed they were simply doing the job that had been asked of them. Unlike many who served, Perconte was fortunate enough to build a long and happy life after the war. He married the love of his life, Evelyn, built a home in Joliet, and raised their son, Richard. Friends remembered him as a man who rarely complained and almost always greeted visitors with a smile. Having survived one of history's most devastating conflicts, he appreciated the peace that followed. The renewed attention brought by Band of Brothers became one of the great joys of his later years. He treasured the reunions with fellow veterans, enjoyed attending the Emmy Awards alongside actor James Matteo, who portrayed him in the series, and developed a lasting friendship with the actor. The two remained in regular contact by telephone, a fitting reminder that Perconte's legacy had extended far beyond the battlefields where it began. Was Frank Perconte your favorite member of Easy Company? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe.